I'm currently recording this as my house is kind of ever slowly getting drifted into snowbanks, and I figured to get my mind off the howling winds outside, I wanted to kind of rant on something. So let's talk about Darklands, because I've been wanting to talk about that for a while now. It's a game that I have come to love since I discovered it, but also have come to really hate it just due to so many decisions that I keep finding and questioning why. So yeah, I would say just here are the top 5 things I find wrong with Darklands at the moment. Number 1, the rules. I really don't need to explain this since I kind of covered this in my first video. 19 pages to explain the basics of the attack action. General being used interchangeably for the player, but also the model that most of the rules also refer to and revolve around. Weird repeating segments, just rules in different formats, like how in equipment you read about hands, but then when you go to specifics like shot and sorceress equipment, it has to repeat everything on like hands and whatnot again. And do I even need to bring up the scan codes that just have nothing to work with? They just don't work. Now, to give some credit, the rules aren't fully understandable, and they're not fully, poorly written. Like, when I can occasionally stop and read, more importantly, understand what the rulebook's trying to say, it makes sense. There is a system here that you can somewhat understand every now and again. Hell, it's why there's just at least enough players that might actually do understand it to actually have Mersha host tournaments going on. So, hey, kudos to those players. But to everyone else, and including me, it's a lot to chew through, and it feels very unnecessary by doing all of this. Number 2, gameplay. This one I can't really speak too much on since I never actually have played like an official game with another player, at least besides myself. And on top of that, this also kind of coincides with part 1 a bit with the overall rules themselves, but just to briefly touch up on some things, how does gameplay exactly work, or how are you supposed to like really keep track of it all? A good chunk of war games require like lots of like templates and tokens, but Darklands almost feels like you need a token from everything, from representing your general, the various orders your units are in, continuous effects, and the list just kind of goes on that you almost feel like you're drowning more in tokens than miniatures, or both. How do certain gameplay features, like say a noble attached to a unit that then gets attacked by another unit, how does that work if you're targeting that unit? I've really tried reading the rules but never really understand. Again, this is kind of where like the first issue like tangles with the second issue. I think another concern is just the importance or any use of human units. I very easily see like Age of Sigmar like heavily leaning more into like monster mash armies where it's just like 3 big models or whatever, and that's kind of what I get a lot with Darklands at the moment in like just some of the army rosters that you could build from it. Again, it might just be due to my inexperience, but humans, I don't really see how they're really kind of supposed to compete when, a giant mammoth or just like mammoth and werewolves and stuff can just generally outperform them. I think maybe there's a difference in skill, but I don't have the time to look it up. Part 3, the models. I'm still going to say I do love Mersha's models. They're very well detailed. I love the aesthetic of them. They're overall good, but I wouldn't exactly be honest with myself if I said I didn't have issues with like some of the old resin models that they had worked with. I also feel like overall though, Mersha almost seems to have like a lot of change in materials in the background at the moment. Like these 2 models I believe are both resin, but the one on the right here that I recently assembled, it feels much more like a different resin, or almost I would say even feels more like plastic. Yeah, I would maybe also say that this was just like a bad case for this one, because when I got it and when I was assembling it, a lot of like the slot peg holes inserts point itself was covered up, so I had to take like my drill and kind of actually drill out the spot where the thing came in. It was a lot of whittling. It was a bit more of a hassle than I would like, and it's just I'm not really sure like how they didn't like spot this, or just if this is like a problem with the specific material that they're using. Not that any of say more of their 3D printed stuff actually has these issues, because honestly those have come out pretty well, at least with like these this like white unit that I got. But then you have, say, this model right here, which leads to yet another issue that I've kind of come across. Well, Let me just explain this a little story. When they showed off this new model in their Atlantis range for basically like a resculpt, I basically saw the old sculpt with this particular helmet and wanted to buy it. Yet I got the new sculpt instead. I've been double checking everything. I never got a message back from them, and even looking at the prices, I basically just paid the regular price for the new model, and that's kind of rubbed me the wrong way because I'm not really a fan of this resculpt. It looks far too similar to another sculpt that they have, which I guess they're still considering of like re-releasing still, and I'm not even sure like why, because it looks fairly fine at the moment. Or better yet, you have this giant from the Norse faction. This old one right here has been around for a while. I've seen it plenty of times as I've been scrolling past their page. They very recently released like a new set of it, so now you actually can get a full unit, but they changed the design of this named model now. So now that initial design goes to this new hero, and yet even still, I'm looking at it and it's just like the proportions still feel off, and maybe it's also just the angle of like the rendered photo, but it almost looks like there's less detail on him in general. And it's just, I'm not really sure if I actually kind of like this shift in design. It kind of loses a little bit of that tange or that feel of what drew me to this in the first place. I don't know, it's either that or I've just kind of looked at these models for so long now that it's a little weird seeing them in very different forms, or at the very least not providing, like, I don't know, at least in the case of like this model, like different head options that have like some choice. Number 4, Kickstarter issues. Rob, the creator of Mersha, started this whole thing from a Kickstarter, and it took a while, but eventually that stuff did come out. The thing is though, I feel like this is a very bad habit he has of getting a Kickstarter going, releasing a good chunk of it, but then trying to release yet another Kickstarter because I want to believe he just has a cool idea, he wants to act on it. As someone who effectively backed one Kickstarter from a company that then created multiple other Kickstarters, and then later found out that was mostly just basically was just a massive money sink in the long run, I'm kind of pissed at this now that I've discovered it. You see this particular jute set starter right here? This was announced all the way back in this particular Kickstarter in 2018, 6 years ago. Someone's been waiting that long somewhere for that particular set. And I think all of this combined kind of leads to the 5th point, is that there is a lack of consistency. There's no consistency in whether Rob actually sets something in date, because he can always push it back later. This is actually something that I somewhat brought up with the 2nd edition rulebook when I first talked about Darklands. There's not really a consistency in, say, some of the rules or just how Rob like wants to push things forward, because you can look at some army rosters that will have like these warrior profiles for models that don't even have previews yet. And I would say the rules are inconsistent as well, but honestly, I think they're actually just more consistent on being overly complex. It mostly just shows like a lot of issues going on, what you can assume are a lot of issues going on behind the scenes. And I think overall it just is very unhealthy for Rob and his company moving forward if they continue like this. So how can this even be resolved? Well, I would dare say it's 2 simple words that you could follow: consistency and trimming. For the rules, just trim down a lot of the fat. Find more ways that you can remove the repetition. Make things easier to understand. Stop and release a 3rd edition if you have to, just to try to get this done. Maybe trim down a lot of the tokens that you use. Like, I don't really see the point of having like multiple fire tokens available unless that's like something that is really, really important. On a brief but related side note, I have been meaning to talk about and going over the rules of my old rewrite that I announced a while back. I might do like a stream of that later, like near the end of July, if I have some free time over the weekend. I have no idea what I'm doing with that, I gotta look into it, but I definitely do want to talk about that, so if you're interested, I'll be doing that. For consistency, I would say just at the moment, Rob is trying to get yet another Kickstarter going soon. And you know what? Fine, but I would at the very least say once that's done, don't try to work on any more Kickstarters until you've actually finished like all your other orders that you've promised for a while now. At the very least, get production down to like the last 3 months. Plan things out. Sit down and set out a proper schedule for when this stuff is supposed to come out and really work hard to get that done. Make it so that in like the last 3 months of production, you can now start to say like, okay, we're wrapping this up. Let's start launching another Kickstarter, or just how much ever more time it would take to like launch another Kickstarter and get like another wave going. I am not a expert on business planning, but that's just an idea of how I think I would try to run it. Lastly, I would just stop and say, like, be a bit more consistent on maybe just what kind of material you plan on using for your models that you send out in the future. I don't really want to be dealing with like this different resin versus like then this different resin and then just like it covers the pockets over then what is very clearly 3D printed where I need to also like clean it up, but I'm perfect. Honestly, I'm just kind of fine with that. I think there just needs to be more. It's mostly just streamline. That's honestly what I can just say. It's just streamline how you produce your models. And of course, if you do want to grab any of these models, you can always go to the store, or better yet, you can go onto their Patreon or My Mini Factory, subscribe through one of their subscription systems, and occasionally get some cool free stuff. I think it's also a nice little way to kind of keep supporting them in the future. It makes it a lot more consistent and maybe adds a bit more to that consistency that they very desperately need. Right now, they are trying to get back into like a loyalty program, so go for X number of months to get some nice free models as an extra side bonus. I really just want this company to succeed. I like them, I like the look of their models, I like the idea of their game. It just has a lot of issues that it needs some ironing out. Anyways, those are my just thoughts on Darklands at the moment. I plan on doing a stream sometime near the end of the month, talk about the rules and maybe like some sort of rewrite. If that is any sort of interest to you, maybe just subscribe to the channel so you'll be notified when I actually do attempt that. Give this video a like if you really agreed with some of the thoughts. Share some comments down below on what your thoughts on Mercer are or how you would want them to improve. And I will see you soon, maybe.